Welcome back on the Power Lunch on this Friday, as we've been introducing you to school board members who are on the ballot right now throughout the week. And of course, early voting goes on until February 27th. So get out and vote if you can. You can go to the library, the county office building here in Dixon, and vote today, Monday or Tuesday, all of this leading up to Super Tuesday, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. But I'm thrilled to have joining us today Miss Debbie Gold with League of Women Voters. Good morning, and how are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, for our listeners, this may be the first time that they're hearing of the League of Women Voters. I hope it's not, but if it is, can you explain just briefly what it is that this group does?
Sure. We actually have been around in Tennessee since women got the right to vote in 1920. And importantly, when women got the right to vote, the league had already formed because we all believed that it was important for people to know not just that they could vote, but to have the knowledge to be good voters, to be informed voters. So that's all what we're about, is how to be informed and engaged citizens and to really participate in the voting process. We are a nonpartisan organization, and for every election cycle, we work really hard to make sure people are both registered and actually participating in the election process.
Well, I think it's awesome anytime we're talking about informing the electorate about the voting process, getting folks registered. But I want to go back to what you said. This has been an organization in place really since the suffragette movement and the right to vote here in Tennessee. And I think sometimes we forget we're 104 years removed now. We're coming up on the 104th anniversary. And that was a dramatic process here in Tennessee. It didn't look like the amendment would pass. And then maybe you can speak on this a little better than I can, but there was a process to identify who was going to vote yes and who was going to vote no on the amendment in August of 1920, and it involved flowers. Is that right?
That's right. So, of course, if you don't have the right to vote, you have to do a lot of things to get your voice across.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that happened in the summer in August of 1920 is that women from across the state, in every county, there was a committee of women working on trying to get their legislators to vote in favor of this amendment, that would give women the right to vote. And they identified them with white and red roses in their lapels. So they would give legislators a red rose if they were voting to oppose this, and a white rose if they were in favor of it. And so it was referred to at the time as the War of the Roses. And that was how people were tracking the votes. And at the very last minute, truly at the last minute, the last roll call vote, Harry Byrne, a very, very young legislator from Oneida, Tennessee, changed his vote at the last minute because his mother had sent him a letter and said, be a good boy and vote for women.
What an awesome story. I love it every time I hear it. But the idea of, mom knows best. And
Exactly.
I don't know if I would be able to vote against something that my mom said, hey, do what's right here, be a good boy. So that's a fantastic story, and I love it in the legacy of voting here in Tennessee. And what a cool moment that is for women voters. And of course, now again, coming up on 104 years removed from that vote, it's second nature to us to think that everyone has the right to vote. And yet your organization works on making sure that everyone does go and vote, because especially here in Tennessee, we see very low voter turnout numbers. As your organization is working, what are some of the reasons that you come across for voters staying home, whether it be early voting, day of, primaries, general elections, all these things? Why is Tennessee a state where we struggle to get the vote out?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, and some of them are internal and some are external. So what we know is that Tennessee has for many years been in the very bottom listings of both voter participation and voter registration compared to states across the country. And one of the reasons is that we have an awful lot of laws on the books that make it harder for people to vote. So it's sort of all those reasons together. There are places across the country that do states where they do same-day voter registration instead of having to register 30 days in advance. Before we had the technology we do now, that, 30 days seemed like a reasonable paperwork trail time, but we now know that you can do it in a day. Other states do. So there are a lot of, then there's a range in between. So the fact is it takes we do a lot of that. We have incredible difficulties for people who've ever had a felony in their past to be able to get their rights back. Experts say that Tennessee is, if not one of the worst, maybe even the worst place in the country to get their voting rights restored for someone. And we make it difficult for college students to vote. We have photo ID laws, which frankly make it hard for people who don't drive to get the photo ID that they need in order to vote. That's a real problem, perhaps, for some of the places in your communities where there's not a DMV station in the county that provides it. So there are a lot of reasons. And then frankly, some people just get discouraged because they really feel that their vote doesn't count.
Well, in Tennessee, I've heard that from a lot of people, especially in an extremely red state. When you're in a rural community, if you are a Democrat or a more liberal voter, I've had several friends in that arena that say, what difference does it make? The Republican candidate or the conservative candidate is going to win 80% of the vote. And the pushback that I've always given is your vote counts regardless. Go exercise your right. There are a lot of movements throughout history that never would have gotten started if people had just stayed home. Is that the encouragement that you give as well? The vote still counts?
Well, we always believe that it counts. And every year there are elections that are decided by less than 20 votes. So yes, individual votes count. But I think the other thing that we say to people who are a minority party in an area where the politics seem to fall with the majority party is that there's a difference in the way someone after they're elected, how they vote, how they manage their position in power, if they have 51% of the vote as opposed to whether they have 80% of the vote. And so you'll often hear people when it's a close election saying, I'm reaching across both sides of the aisles. I'm really trying to make sure I represent everyone in my community. And when people don't show up and only one side is voting, why do they need to reach out to everybody? Why do they need to care about minority votes? And our democracy really depends on honoring both the majority party's wishes, but also respecting minorities.
Well, I think that's an issue that's been lost in, say, the last 8 to 12 years because we've become so partisan. It's not just important to come out on election day, it's also important to stay in touch with those representatives through their term as well, because we often hear from local representatives and senators that, all I'm hearing is support for Bill X or opposition to Bill Y. It's very important, even if your candidate doesn't win, to stay informed on the issues that the newly elected person is representing.
Right. I mean, we can't blame an elected representative for not knowing things if we don't inform them. Mm. And so I think that's part of the responsibility of what we see for voters is that it's a two-way communication. We want to hear from our elected officials, but our elected officials need to hear from us as well. They can't do mind reading about what the people in their community want if no one communicates with them.
Well, you're hearing a little bit of what is going into this election cycle and every election cycle, I feel like, which is being an informed voter and getting out and voting. You've heard conversation, and that will continue with our school board candidates as The school board has risen to unprecedented levels of attention with our director of schools situation over the last few months. And now I think school board representatives are in the crosshairs of voters as we head into Super Tuesday. If you vote day of, that being March 5th, you can vote for the school board as well as the Republican primary, but you can vote early between now and next Tuesday, February 27th, and get those votes in for school board. One of the things that I've said all along is if you took issue with the way the director of schools process played out, you maybe didn't like some of the things that you heard or saw or whatever, the best way you can affect that is to vote. If there was a particular school board member that you didn't agree with, I'm fairly certain they have a challenger this time around. So get out and vote between now and February 27th at the county office here in Dixon or in Charlotte at the, I don't know what to call the building over there, the election commission building, I guess. You can vote there in early voting. And the day of voting will be at your typical polling places, which you can check on your voter registration card for where you're supposed to be voting. If you've moved, you need to call the election commission and figure out where you are supposed to vote and make sure that your registration is accurate. You're on the right roll for election day. We are joined by Zoom this morning talking about voting and voters' rights with Miss Debbie Gould of the League of Women Voters. And Ms. Gould, I know if people are going out, they may have already seen this in early voting. But there's some new signage at polling places that might seem a bit intimidating. I have not been to vote yet, but I've heard people talking about this. Tell us what we're finding at our polling places right now.
Right. So in 2023, the state legislature passed a new bill, and the bill requires that every polling place in the state has posted on a sheet of paper with a yellow sheet of paper with black bold writing on it that says that you need to be a bona fide member of a political party in order to vote in the primary, and that it is illegal to do so otherwise. And it can be a misdemeanor and potentially even a felony depending on certain categories. So it certainly, we certainly in the league see this as having a chilling effect. And here's the problem. In Tennessee, we do not register by political party officially. There is no list that the election commission has of who is registered in a party. It is not on our voter registration form. There is no way for anyone to know if they are, as the sign would say, a bona fide member of a political party or affiliated with a political party. So we believe that this sign has a real chilling effect, because how do you know if you're breaking the law or not? It's very confusing. And the League of Women Voters really prides itself on providing accurate information to voters for every single election. And we're just having to sit this one out and say, we can't tell you what to do because we would never give you information that might make it possible for you to break the law. We don't know. So, we have no advice on it, but we are very concerned that there will be voters who come to the polls, see the sign that's posted and say, maybe I just shouldn't be voting this time. I don't know what to do.
Well, my question before we get into the chilling effect is where did this come from? Because I see the word bona fide and I'm taken back to the Soggy Bottom Boys and the 1920s.
Right.
And I'm very confused not only where that language came from, but where the idea for this law last year came out of.
Well, I mean, there were legislators that promoted it, but I last year there was also an attempt, which is also ongoing this year, There was legislation that failed last year and is being proposed again in different forms that would close the primaries in Tennessee. And so I believe that this was actually sort of part of the packaging of it, was that that it would have that impact. But certainly it's an attempt to make sure that there's not cross-party voting. But in addition, it's also because there's no information about what a bona fide member is. And you're right, it does take me back to that movie. Because there's nothing, you could actually be someone who has voted for a political party for a variety of reasons for many years, but occasionally switched and suddenly wonder, does this mean I'm not affiliated anymore? I can't tell you. I can't tell you at what point it would be defined.
You talked about cross-party voting, and this applies to primaries specifically. Is there concern before this law? Was there concern that we had Republicans crossing over to vote in a Democratic primary for a weaker candidate, or vice versa? Because it feels like in Tennessee, where the majority party is Republican by a large margin, it would have to be that way. It would have to be a Republican member crossing over to vote in favor of a weaker candidate. That would be the only way that would seem to make sense to me. What good would it do Democrats to cross over the other way, because they're in such a small number? So I guess my question at the end of all that rambling there is, crossover voting in Tennessee doesn't seem like it would be a major issue.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, I can't talk about the motivations for this, since I'm not sure of their motivations. But I mean, I can only talk about what the impact is. And
Sure.
and there's just a lot. I mean, it's just really kind of baffling. It does feel to the League of Women Voters that this was a solution in search of a problem, because we have not seen, if you look back, we're not seeing issues of people, being called out for voting inappropriately. But as you know, when you go to the polls, a poll worker will have both ballots in front of them, and they'll say, which one do you want? You are in Tennessee eligible to use whichever primary ballot you want. And it's whichever ballot you want. You don't have to identify yourself as saying that you're part of a party.
Before we take our last break on the show, we are going to come back and talk about some legal action that the League of Women Voters is taking. But have we seen so far in early voting, have we seen this law come into play yet? Are you aware of any situations where people have dealt with any sort of punitive action so far?
We have not heard of any punitive action. We have heard from, anecdotally, we've heard from individual voters from across the state who have been puzzled by this and felt frustrated by it. But but there's not been any punitive action to date.
I would be curious to ask Tennessee state legislators to walk me through what would happen, because that would be a fascinating conversation, I'm sure. We've got Miss Debbie Gould with us from the League of Women Voters. We're talking about this new signage, and even the signage itself is a little bit stark. Yellow paper with black letters. But we're going to talk more about what the League of Women Voters are looking to do to resolve this issue. And today we want to make you aware of it when you go in to vote, whether it's early voting or on March 5th, that this sign is going to be there. Go about your business. At least that's my advice. Go ahead and vote as you normally would. And we'll come back and talk about the legal case going on with regards to this law in just a moment. I want to remind you, we've got basketball for you tonight as the The Lady Cougars will be hosting Springfield. That game coming up at 7 o'clock. Dylan will have the coverage for you there. And then I'll be at Creekwood as the Lady Redhawks are playing host to Lexington. We'll have boys basketball tomorrow night. Dixon County boys headed to Kirkwood, and the Creekwood boys at home taking on Lexington as well. All those games start at 7. Stay tuned on Facebook and Instagram at 1015 The Ride for all the details on where you can listen to and watch those games. Miss Debbie Gold is joining me from the League of Women Voters. We're talking about this new law in Tennessee. You're going to see some new signage warning you about being a bona fide member of a party as you vote during early voting or Super Tuesday voting for the Republican primary, school board, all these things. We've already said that we're not real sure what that means, and not sure enough that the League of Women Voters are taking legal action. What can you tell us, Ms. Gold, about this case and what you all hope to accomplish through this legal action?
Right. So we have filed a case in federal court about this law and its implementation, and we are joining with 2 individual plaintiffs who feel that they are also struggling with what to do with this law. And one of them is a name that I think a lot of your listeners will recognize, and that is Victor Ashe, who is a former Republican mayor of Knoxville. And his contention is that he has written columns in the newspaper that have been critical of his fellow Republicans. And so he said, how can I guarantee that I will be considered a bona fide Republican? I don't know what that term means. And so I think this points out some of the complexity of this law and its implementation, is that anyone can feel uncertain about what a vague and confusing law this is and what it could mean in practice. So based on this, we have asked, we've asked for an injunction on having this law implemented. We filed the case in December, and we're hoping for an injunction before the March primary, and have not heard anything back yet. But we certainly hope that we'll be able to stop this law from going into effect in the future and when it goes to court, because we really believe that it can have serious implications for how we run our primaries.
Yeah, I can't see much benefit. I can see, as you've termed it, a chilling effect and warding some voters off. It's not worth jail time or a fine. So I can certainly understand that. Now, before I let you go, I did want to give you an opportunity to tell folks, if they'd like to support the cause of the League of Women Voters, how they can get more information and how they can help.
Well, I think that one of the ways that listeners can help is actually to talk to their legislators and say, you know, we're concerned about laws that are making it harder for us to vote, and we can see what the implications can be. And as you said, you know, some of the important races that are coming up are school board races. I know in Dixon County in particular, this is a particularly important issue, and some of the other counties around us, we're also seeing that those are important issues. And during, again, it's been very recent, it was last year that school board races became partisan races. And this is actually making it very difficult for a lot of people who might choose to vote one way on federal elections, but might have different opinions about what local races look like, and whether it's school board candidates or, you know, I know that, for example, you know, that there are other races that are contested in some of our counties, even for this election cycle, and people want to be able to make those choices, and we're really concerned that they're not going to be able to make the choices they want. I think talking to their legislators and say, we're paying attention, we care about these issues, Sometimes our legislators are only listening to, are only hearing from people on the real hot button issues. Taxes, for example, or certainly reproductive rights, gun safety issues. They're hearing about those issues, but some of these issues about the fundamental right to vote sort of underlay all of it. And if we don't have the right to vote and to make the choices that are good for us as individuals, then we've lost a fundamental part of our democracy.
Well, I certainly think it's an important issue. It may not, as you said, may not register as a hot button issue, but I think it's an important issue. And I appreciate the fight that you and your organization are putting on behalf of Tennessee voters. So thank you for that. And we appreciate you taking some time with us.
Happy to come back anytime.
Well, Miss Debbie Gould, our guest for the second half of the Power Lunch today with the League of Women Voters of Tennessee. We are going to wrap up the Power Lunch. Join us again on Monday at 11:30. And remember, get out and vote. We've got primary early voting until Tuesday, and then day of Tennessee primary school board. Those things are on the ballot on March the 5th. That's going to do it for the Power Lunch today. We'll see you again on Monday right here on 101.5 The Ride.